Good morning and welcome to another whiskey review. Whiskey for breakfast. It's the true spirit of Christmas, isn't it? Day 8 of the Master of Malt Drinks by the Dram Whiskey Advent Calendar. So we are a third of the way in. And I haven't fallen behind yet, so that's a thing. What have we got today? Ooh, something new. Put that back over there so you can see Glenrothes shame. Today, and not 100% sure how to pronounce this, because this is another world whiskey, but I believe this is Mackmyra, which I do know is a Swedish whiskey. So this is exactly why I went for the standard whiskey advent calendar rather than the Scotch one, because I think it's really good. Everyone needs to broaden their horizons and try different things, because a lot of world whiskey these days, especially compared to 10 years ago, it's really quite good. It's really getting places, and it's not good for any of us to be too narrow-minded. Let's get it in the glass and see what we've got here. I haven't actually had this one before. This is, there's different expressions from Mackmyra. This is Svensk Rok. That's probably not how you pronounce it. It says Svensk Rok / Amerikansk Ek. So I believe that Amerikansk Ek means American oak. So that's going to be bourbon oak. So that's a good sign. I don't know what Svensk Rok means. Svensk is obviously Swedish. What is rock? Obviously not rock. I mean, Bruichladdich made a whiskey called Rocks, but I don't think that's what that means. But Amerikansk Ek, American oak, quite happy about that, because I believe that the Mackmyra whiskey that I tried before was matured in virgin oak, and I wasn't that impressed with that. So hopefully this will be a little bit better. Okay. So that's smoky. So that's interesting. There's a really nice dry smokiness to this whiskey. I don't know if this is peated or if it's wood smoke. It actually smells more of a wood smoke than a peat smoke. It's not particularly medicinal. It's drier and more woody, but definitely a nice smokiness. And there's a curious sweetness to this whiskey as well. It's not the sort of sweetness that you normally get from a whiskey. It's more of a confectionery jelly bean note. I don't know what that flavour is that you get in, obviously there's lots of different flavours of jelly bean, but there's an underlying jelly sweetness that you get to all of them, and there's a little bit of that in this whiskey. That smokiness though, I said that it's not a peaty, medicinal, iodine-y sort of islipy, and it's not. But when you combine that dry and slightly sweet smokiness with that confectionery note, it does actually turn into something a little bit medicinal. But rather than antiseptic, I'd say it's more of a kind of a cough syrup note. Not that it smells like cough syrup. It's not a bad whiskey. It's a very good one so far. Getting some really nice aromas of smoked grist. And quite some interesting mineral notes, and I'll describe them as inky. I'm sure I've described something else up here. I think it's probably the Aerolite Lindsay that I said inky, and I'm paranoid every time I experience that it's because I'm writing with a pen, whereas I don't normally. I normally type my notes on a keyboard. But there's definitely a little hint of inkiness in there. It's also quite a herbal whiskey, and it's herbal in quite an unusual way. And it's good that you can really tell that this is not Scotch, it's not bourbon, it's not Japanese whiskey, it's not tequila, it's its own thing. And it's really good to see a distillery doing that. And I'll rave all day about how great English whiskey is, but I do think that English whiskey is, and it's the same with Japanese whiskey, they are really in the Scottish style, whereas bourbon is a completely different thing, brandy is a completely different thing, and this Swedish whiskey is a completely different thing as well. And whether you love it or not, I quite like it. It has to be said that it is unique and they're doing something new, and that's a great thing. I think there's also a little hint of saltiness and a little hint of smoked fish in there as well. So far, very unusual nose, but a nice one. I'm liking this. Let's see how it tastes. So on the palate again, quite mineral, inky again, a little bit bitter, quite herbal. It's got something of it, like a little bit like a herbal liqueur. I can't remember what it's called, but there's an Eastern European herbal liqueur, which is, it's a little bit fierce. It's not something that I would buy, but someone will probably be able to remind me what that Eastern European herbal liqueur is. There's a little hint in here that's a little bit reminiscent of that. There's also a little bit of bitter wood on the palate of this one, but it must be said that the palate is a little bit simpler than the nose. There's a little bit less going on. And the finish, I'm just going to have a little bit more to check the finish. The finish is really the worst part of this whiskey. It's a shortish finish, and there's a slightly unpleasant note of cherry and cough syrup. It really is quite medicinal, but it's not medicinal in the way of a really nice peated Islay whiskey. It's medicinal in the sense of one of those medicines that you had in a bottle when you were a child. And it's one of those medicines that had quite an unpleasant taste. And what they quite often do with those medicines is make them cherry flavoured, because cherry will mask a lot of really unpleasant flavours. And it's not on the palate. It doesn't spoil things, it's not ruined this whiskey, it's not a bad whiskey, but there's something in the finish that reminds me of that cherry flavoured medicine from when you were sick as a child. But overall, I'm really happy with this, and I think I would say this is better than the previous offerings that I've had from Mackmyra. I think now that I'm getting accustomed to that dry, woody smoke on the nose, I'm starting to pick up some more oakiness. In particular, I'd say that there's some notes of freshly sawn oak and sort of a doughy, starchy, slightly young oakiness on the nose as well. Yeah, quite into that. Let me know in the comments what you think of this Mackmyra and what you think of Swedish whiskey. Do you think that it's a completely different thing to other whiskey? And do you like it?